Alright, welcome back everyone. Today we're going to be covering the Laci Peterson case and uncovering the shocking and disturbing details that were left out of the Netflix documentary. This two-part series will dive into the details behind how Scott Peterson's own behavior proves a pattern of guilt beyond a reasonable doubt, the conditions of Laci and Connor's body, along with our exploration of alternate theories behind Laci's disappearance. A lot of these details were left out of the documentary for legal reasons or because they were just too disturbing to include for general public viewing. This two-part series will examine the key moments that raised suspicions and set the stage for the investigation. Then in part 2, we'll break down the legal arguments, alternate theories, and everything that played out in court. And a huge thank you to OP Quirky Motor, whose extensive write-up on Reddit's Unresolved Mysteries sub, linked in the description below, helped us make a very thorough video while shedding light on the lesser-known details of this case. Now, fair warning, this video does contain spoilers of the Netflix and A&E documentary out now. This is Mystery and Misfortune, where we tell murder mystery stories every week. A picture-perfect couple from Modesto, California, their lives seemingly filled with promise and happiness, was shattered when Laci, 8 months pregnant, vanished on Christmas Eve 2002. The subsequent investigation unearthed a disturbing picture of Scott Peterson, a man whose behavior before and after Laci's disappearance painted him as the prime suspect in what would become one of the most infamous true crime cases in American history. In this two-part series, we will unravel the layers of this chilling case. In this video, part 1 of our deep dive into the case, we'll explore Scott Peterson's pattern of behavior leading up to December 24th and his demeanor and behavior after Laci went missing, revealing a man desperate to maintain his double life, with his wife's pregnancy marking the end of his deceitful freedom. Here's why Scott Peterson is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, and how his own pattern of deceptive, dodgy, and downright shady behavior marked him as suspect number 1 and eventually led to his conviction. Now, the timeline is really important in this case, and so is the context around the time when Laci disappeared and what was going on in Scott's life. Now, the documentary does lay out the facts of the case, but I'm going to put it all together and spell out what was going on, when it was going on, and how that impacts everything that happened. Let's start by laying out what Scott's character is like, and also his relationship with Laci before the disappearance, and his relationship with Amber Frey. Because all three of these elements together form the backbone of everything that went down. At first glance, Scott and Laci Peterson, they seem like the perfect couple. But behind closed doors, we think Scott was anything but the doting husband that he appeared to be. Friends and family had no idea that Scott was leading a duplicitous playboy lifestyle, and it was filled with secrets and lies. Laci maintained their home, and she prepared for the arrival of their son, Connor. And while this was happening, Scott was having affairs and showing a disturbing ambivalence towards fatherhood. His affair with Amber Frey is well known and documented, but what's less well known is his pattern of affairs. Scott had at least 4 affairs that were unearthed during the investigation. A lot of people think that Amber Frey was the only affair Scott had while he was married to Laci Peterson, and this is a misconception. Scott had at least 4 affairs while he was married to Laci. Scott dated one woman, Janet Ilse, for 5 months and told her he wanted to meet her family. Janet had no idea that he was married. Another woman, a girl named Michelle, had been dating Scott, but she said they had only gone on a couple of dates. Scott also briefly saw another woman named Katie, and another unnamed woman had a one-night stand with Scott in Las Vegas. And then, of course, there was also Amber Frey. Scott Peterson was a chameleon in his relationships, adapting his behavior to fit the preferences of the women he dated. Whether it was embracing healthy habits because he was dating a health nut, or giving up meat because he was dating a vegetarian, or pretending to have a degree in divinity, which is for Amber Frey, who was interested in spirituality. Scott made these changes while married to Laci and also managed to hide his actions. And we know that being unfaithful doesn't prove guilt in a murder, in a crime, but it does reveal Scott's ability to deceive and portray himself as this perfect husband while doing all of these deceptive actions, which is significant in understanding his character. And I think what's really infuriating about uncovering all of this as a woman is the way that he duped all of these women, starting with his wife, his pregnant wife, and then Amber Frey, who thought he was single, and he painted himself out to be this perfect gentleman. And then all of these other women he dated also did not know that he was married. And I think that in the modern day and age, he would get found out pretty quickly. But, back then, back in 2002, social media was just not a big thing. And so there was a lot of separation, just even within towns within the same state. And so if someone was that committed to living this double life, a life of lies and womanizing and deception, they could easily just take advantage of the distance between two different towns and date within kind of like these different circles and just hope to never get found out. So he was deceiving a lot of people, really everyone around him at the time, his own wife, his own family, her family, his friends, her friends, and then also all of these romantic partners he had and their circles of people, right? Like he was pretending to be these different things to different people depending on what was expected of him in those situations. And yes, like someone can be a liar and a cheater and still never make that leap into murder, and murder of your own wife and your unborn child, which is a leap we hope we never see in a case like this ever again. But I think that he knew that the charade was going to end at some point, and Laci being 8 months pregnant was a ticking time bomb of his life, kind of him having to choose one or the other. And when we examine Scott's attitude towards becoming a dad, it also shows this deep internal conflict. His conflicting statements and actions regarding fatherhood are so telling. On one hand, he was painting the nursery and obtaining a Viagra prescription to help with conception. And those were actions that suggest that, yes, he was involved in the process of starting a family. But on the other hand, he made this offhand comment to Anne-Marie Rocha about hoping for infertility in the midst of Laci's struggle to become pregnant. And then he made this statement to Amber Frey about wanting a vasectomy, which indicates a deep ambivalence or even aversion towards becoming a father. On a home video of a holiday, Scott has to hold this baby for a few minutes and he goes, "Well, this isn't very fun." And Laci immediately comes to his rescue and says, "Oh, this is the only time we'll see him do that," which she means holding the baby, and she just kind of laughs it off. But these conflicting behaviors create an image of a man who was just very deeply conflicted about his future, or possibly only going through the motions to maintain appearances. It is fully possible that he wanted to maintain his duplicitous lifestyle, and Laci's pregnancy threatened to unravel the web of lies that he had carefully spun. This was not a man excited about welcoming his first child. This was a man who saw his wife's pregnancy as a roadblock to the life he wanted to live. Now, let's establish the timeline before Laci's disappearance, because the context within which he went missing and everything that was going on in Scott's life is so important. So, Laci went missing Christmas Eve, December 24th of 2002. Now, a month and a half before that, in early November, Scott met Sean Sibley at a work conference. And one day after the conference, a bunch of them who had gone to the conference were having drinks in the hotel bar, and they were watching TV, and Scott was kind of goofing around the bar, and no one there knew he was married. And he asked Sean Sibley what he should put on his name tag to help attract women. She said something like, "Oh, put 'I'm rich' on your name tag." And Scott said he was going to put HB, which was short for horny bastard. I mean, this is the type of F-boy behavior that would get a guy blocked on a dating app, nowadays. But, at that point, Sean and Scott were just kind of hanging out, but Sean was wearing her engagement ring, and she told Scott that she was in a committed relationship. Scott was not wearing a ring. And the next day at the conference, Sean and Scott exchanged business cards, and Scott kind of went on his way. And then he called her a couple of weeks later and asked if she had any friends who would want to meet up with him. And then Sean suggested her friend Amber. And even though Sean and Scott had spoken on the phone several times, he just never mentioned that he was married. So over here is where I'm like, this man actually went out of his way to kind of pursue this woman who was engaged, who then kind of introduced him to her friend, maybe to just get him to ease up off of her. And it's just it's giving desperation. So in mid-November, Scott first met Amber Frey. Now, this is less than 40 days before Laci goes missing. Amber was a 26-year-old single mother of a toddler, and she worked as a massage therapist near Fresno, California, which is about an hour's drive from Modesto. So from their first date and on, Scott just acted like the perfect gentleman. He was buying her flowers. He got a private dining room for their first date. And a lot of people who support Scott and support the Scott is Innocent project will kind of try to say that Amber and Scott's relationship was not very serious, but Amber and Scott had, every time that they saw each other, it was a multi-day visit. So you can just imagine that things were pretty intense. Their first date was a whole weekend together at a hotel. He bought champagne and strawberries. And, by the second date, he was making her dinner and buying her daughter gifts. He picked up Amber's daughter from daycare. He helped them get a Christmas tree and talked about meeting people in Amber's family. Now, what's really shocking to me here is not that he was doing all this, but the money was tight for the Peterson family, and this is well documented in the documentary as well. Now, Laci was just a substitute teacher, and Scott was a fertilizer salesman, and I don't know how much these people make, but that's not a lot of money, right? And if money is kind of tight in the family, but over here he's kind of spending it, lavishing these other women with gifts, that already really shows where he is willing to invest his kind of time and effort and resources. And we're going to tie that point together in a big way, but just for context, throughout their entire relationship, Scott lied to Amber as well. From, being married to what he did for a job. He made it seem like he was some sort of international businessman, and that was why, because of work, that he could not spend the holidays with her, because he was going to Maine for Christmas and Paris for New Year's and then Mexico for work. And none of these things were true. And in early December, Sean Sibley heard from an acquaintance that Scott Peterson was in fact married. Now, Sean was so shocked that she called Scott and she demanded to know if he was married. And Scott eventually calmed her down and said that he had been married in the past. Sean was furious, obviously, and she said she would call Amber and tell Amber the truth. But Scott begged Sean not to do this and insisted that he would tell Amber himself. So this was all on December 8th, and that was the same day Scott began looking at tidal activity in the bay, in the San Francisco Bay, which is where Scott eventually claims to have been fishing the day that Laci had disappeared, and also around where her body and the body of her child had washed up later on. So the next day, on December 9th, 2002, which is 15 days now before Laci disappeared, Scott went to Amber's home and told her that he had to discuss something very serious with her, and he was crying and Amber could not calm him down. And after a while, he finally explained that he had not been fully truthful with her, and he told Amber that he had lost his wife, and this would be his first holiday season without her. And he expressed that he never told Amber about all of this because it was such an upsetting situation. And when Amber said she wasn't mad at Scott for telling her this, he just seemed so happy and so relieved that Amber now knew the quote-unquote truth. So Amber asked him, "You're not married currently, right?" And Scott said, "No, not currently." And after that, Amber never asked him for more details. You know, it just had seemed that he was just so upset, and so she really didn't want to press the issue. And also, it's just such a traumatic experience from the way that he acted, right? And so from that conversation, it was not clear to Amber, which she admitted later on, if this meant Scott's wife had died or that she had left him. And December 9th is critical in the timeline also for the reason that it was also the day that he bought the boat, which was unregistered. And this was the same boat that he went fishing on the day that his wife disappeared. Fast forward to December 14th, and that day, both the Petersons and Amber had Christmas parties that they were supposed to attend. So Scott told Laci that he could not go to the Christmas party because of a work obligation, but the truth was that he was going to Amber Frey's Christmas party. And in pictures that later became infamous, Laci attended a Christmas party alone that evening, 8 months pregnant, while her husband went to a Christmas party with his girlfriend. And after this, Amber and Scott didn't talk for a while because Scott was supposedly traveling. And then fast forward 10 days, December 24th, and Laci went missing. So what's really crystal clear from Scott's pattern of behavior is that his time, his effort, his resources, his prioritization were all shifting away from Laci and her unborn child Connor and shifting towards Amber Frey and her daughter Aina. It's reported that Scott had even repurposed a gift that Laci received at her baby shower for Connor and had given it to Amber's daughter Aina. He had also mentioned to Amber that the kid was not his, that Laci was not pregnant with his child, which I imagine because of the deceptive person that he was, leading this double life, that he gave kind of like these breadcrumbs of truth to Amber after he kind of got found out, and he only just admitted to the bare minimum and still painted himself out to be this victim, this person who is a widower, so that, Amber would take pity on him and still stay with him. And it's clear when you look at the timeline that he made a very conscious choice on December 8th, the day that he got caught by Sean Sibley about his double life, about him being married, that when he was looking at the tidal wave report in the San Francisco Bay, that he knew exactly who he chose, which woman that he wanted to move forward with, and which life he wanted to keep. And at this point, I think a logical, rational person would ask, well, why didn't he just go for divorce? If he was in love with someone else, if he wanted a different life, why didn't he just leave Laci? And her mother, Sharon Rocha, asks the same question in the Netflix documentary. You could have just left her. At least my daughter and my grandson would still be alive. Now, I'll explain why at that time, given the circumstances, why Scott felt that that was not what his options were. And this is because he had already lied in his conversation with Amber after getting caught, where he could have just fessed up and said, hey, yes, I have a wife. Yes, she is pregnant and I plan on getting a divorce. But instead of handling it in a kind of straightforward, mature way, he went about it with more lies, right? So he said, he preyed on their limited knowledge, right? Sean's and Amber's. And he said, yes, I was married, but I am no longer married. Now, how chilling is that? That less than a month before your wife disappears, you tell your girlfriend that you lost your wife and you're a widower. But the point here is that Scott did not think he had the time to get the divorce done in time to kind of ease Amber's suspicions. And also because I don't think he wanted to pay alimony. He did not want a kid. He was just very aversive to fatherhood. He didn't think Laci's kid was his. And all of his resources, his attention, his efforts were going towards Amber Frey and her kid. And he had even told Amber that he did not want a biological child of his own, that he was okay with just Amber and her kid, and that's it. So he had zero desire to invest in Laci and Connor. He did not care. And that's why when detectives who had interviewed Scott they mentioned how emotionally detached he seemed, because that was the truth of it. He was detached. He had no investment in Laci or Connor. All of that attention and investment went to Amber and the life that he wanted to build with her. And I think that the Netflix documentary and perhaps Amber's PR just, kind of didn't want to make a big deal of this point. They do lay out the facts in the documentary, but, it's just kind of really crystal clear that in his behavior that this was what he was pursuing. There is a lot of conjecture out there about his mother being a controlling narc and her potential influence on their relationship. And I think Scott's behavior also shows a lot of narcissistic tendencies, but I would love to kind of have that conversation. So here in the comments below, let me know what you guys think. Is he a narcissist? And just judging by his pattern of behavior alone, it's clear this is a man who craves female attention. So given his situation with Laci Peterson, he did not want to be perceived as this heartless coward who left his pregnant wife, but he also did not want to be a father and continue his life with Laci. Remember that Scott was an expert at shaping the perspective others had of him, even if it meant keeping deep, dark secrets and manipulating everyone around him. He deeply cared what others thought of him, and he wanted to navigate out of this messy situation that he created with the best outcome for himself. Even when caught by Amber about his marriage, he manipulated that narrative to make himself seem like the victim of a tragic situation, claiming to be a widower. Scott, being the player that he was, knew the widower card would gain him more sympathy from women over the truth of leaving his pregnant wife a month before she's due. His behavior up until now has shown that Scott's main priority is Scott, even if that means others are getting hurt in the process. There is also the financial angle that Scott stood to benefit $250,000 from Laci's life insurance policy, along with other assets, which is another significant motive. So from any angle you look at it, financial, romantic, or perception-wise, Scott stood to gain significantly from Laci's disappearance. I wish we could interpret Laci's perspective. She was clearly concealing a difficult relationship behind that beaming smile, and at this point knew about the affairs, but I doubt she knew the extent of it. And I think when you're young and in love, you make mistakes, you fall in love with the wrong people, you give people too much grace, hoping for change. Maybe she thought Connor's birth would change Scott. But unfortunately for Laci, Scott Peterson was not deserving of that grace. But being in love with the wrong person should not have been a death sentence for Laci and Connor. That's all for today. I want to do justice to this story and make sense of all the facts laid out in the documentaries. So hit the subscribe button so you don't miss part 2, where we will get into the details of what unfolded the day of Laci's disappearance and the nail-biting investigation that followed. If you found today's episode compelling, please give us a thumbs up and let us know your thoughts in the comments below. Your support is so encouraging to new creators like us to continue telling meaningful stories. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.